Okay. So most of you know that I'm really, really passionate about chiropractic, but most of you don't know why. And so today I'm going to tell you my first experience with chiropractic. When I was 23 years old, I didn't know everything. I didn't want anyone to know that I didn't know everything. So even though my to-be husband said, I'm going to be a chiropractor, I had no idea what it is. I had no concept, no clue. He was like, all right, my 5th year of school starting, we need to go to the doctorate program, so we're moving to Minneapolis. Evan had just turned 2, my firstborn, had just turned 2, and so since my husband was in school from 7:45 in the morning to 10 at night, I had to work. So I was working and found this daycare for Evan, and it was an amazingly wonderful daycare. It was half my paycheck. It was very wonderful, and kids are playing, and it was great. Well, I get a phone call the second week that he's there. He had tripped. He was 2. They tripped, and he fell and hit on, how there's cement on school floors and then a really tiny carpet? He fell and he cracked it up. And they said, he's okay, he's upset, but you should come get him. So, I leave work, I go pick him up, and he's just crying and he's whimpering, and I go home. And I just don't even know how it was possible. The hugest goose egg grew on his head that literally looked like it was like movie makeup. It was larger than a regular egg. And it was on a 2-year-old head. And it was blue and purple and black, and it just like they had these vessels all over it. I have no idea how he didn't break his skull completely through. It was so disgusting. And they're like, no, he's totally fine. I'm like, okay. First time mom. I'm obviously really stupid because everyone says he's fine. So next day, he, prior to this, he spoke at such a young age. He started speaking and enunciating. No one could believe his age because he was brilliant when he was young. He was one of those children that after you had him, you could have at least 5 or 6 more because he laughed all the time. He didn't cry. He slept through the night. He was the easiest kid. It's like, I can have a bunch more of those. Felony hit his head. And even though he was at that time speaking in complete sentences, he stopped talking the very next day. Not a word, except if it was a grunt, a cry, a scream, or a moan. And obviously, first time mom, well, this isn't normal. And they're like, he's just upset. He's just upset. And I'm like, no, there's something wrong. They're like, he's fine. Just, he'll get over it. So that night, he all of a sudden starts having raging diarrhea. So one day after his fall, he has raging diarrhea. And then has raging diarrhea 8 times a day. 8 times, he's 2 years old. And this is not normal. This is not normal. And the daycare is like, it's fine. It's fine. He got something in him, he's pushing it out. And I'm like, okay. He then starts to become violent. Every single time you would talk to him, he just would thrash and hit and scream. He wouldn't talk, but he would thrash and hit and scream. And so after a couple of weeks of this, I'm kind of losing my mind saying, I need to bring him to the medical doctor. There's something wrong. Now, I grew up, every time my stomach hurt, I got, Pepto-Bismol. Every single time I had a sore throat, I got penicillin or amoxicillin or some kind of cillin. That's how I grew up. That's what you do, right? That's what everyone else told you to do. So I brought him to the medical doctor, and she tells me, oh, honey, he's 2. He's teething. This is the terrible twos. He's fine. And I'm like, it's not fine. There's something wrong. And she's like, you're just overreacting. This is the terrible twos. This is what it's like when they turn 2. And then take my baby. I go home. Trevor comes home from school, and like they said, it's just the terrible twos. That this is just what happens. And we're both looking at him like, oh, okay, all right. If this is how it is, okay. A few more weeks go by. Still having diarrhea 8 times a day. At this point, he has acid burns down the back of his legs. And his daycare is calling me saying, we can't have someone changing his diaper this many times. You need to do something. This is not okay. he had rashes now on the front of his thighs, down his arms, on his face. But the rash was different than the rash all down his back of his legs. Like, this is not normal. And the people at the school are like, he's teething. They get a little red in the face when they're teething. And I'm like, this is not normal. At that exact same time, you could set your watch at 2 a.m. every single morning. We would wake up to this blood-curdling scream like he was being murdered. Just screaming. And we jump out of bed and run in as fast as we can, and he's hyperventilating there in the bed, and he would just pass out. He wouldn't say anything. He would just cry and fall asleep. And it was always 2 a.m.? I have no idea why, but always 2 a.m. You could set your watch to it. And we would get up and walk back to our room like, okay, well, he's sleeping now. This is the terrible twos. You know, he's teething. This is normal, right? Couldn't take it. I went to another doctor. And I said, please, there's something wrong with my child. So as a completely different doctor, I told her every single thing that happened, and she's like, well, let's run a few tests. And she's like, no, he's teething. He's 2. Here's some cream. And I remember it was $28. I'll never forget that. And it was the smallest little tube, and I'm like, what's the cream gonna do to make his diarrhea stop? What's the cream gonna do to make him stop waking up at 2 a.m. screaming like he's being hurt? What's the cream gonna do to make him start talking again? What's the cream gonna do about his violence? What about the rest of everything that's rashing up like crazy? What is this gonna do? He's 2. That's what happens. He's teething. It's fine. Go home, tell him the bad news, like, I guess we're wrong. I guess everyone goes through this. This is what happens. So, at this time, we're about 2 months in. Diarrhea 8 times a day. Daycare wants to kick him out. My job is threatening to let me go because I'm taking off so much time because the daycare can't handle it. And I'm always running to the doctor. And my stress, I can't even focus on what I'm doing. It's my child. He's still waking up at 2 a.m. every single night. He still wasn't talking. He was being nothing but violent. The rashes all over his body. I mean, you looked at him and he looked like a raw sore. And it just, there's something wrong. And no one believed me. And I'm like, I know, I'm only 23. And I've never had a child before, but something's wrong. So, take him and like, I can't do this anymore. He has now lost all the color in his legs and his arms, and all of the blood was rushing to his chest. There's something wrong. All of the vital energy that he had was going to his core organs. So and just the lethargy. He was so tired all of the time. He didn't even want to eat anymore. He was a 2-year-old kid that you could tell was just literally giving up on life. He couldn't function anymore. So I brought him to another medical doctor. And I said, you need to help me. And I had tears in my eyes, and I said, my baby's dying, and you need to do something about it. Like, oh, we'll take some x-rays. Take some blood. We'll do some tests. We have no idea what's wrong. We agree there's something wrong, but we don't know what it is. Well, what do you do after that? They send you home and they're like, we have no idea. They didn't give me a diagnosis, but it probably would have been failure to thrive or something ridiculous, but they had no idea. 3 different doctors, 3 different opinions, every single one said, go home. There's nothing that we can do for him. So I go home and I'm losing my mind, like at this point, like thinking that I did something wrong. I'm a horrible mother. How could I ever do this to my child? Whatever I did, I'm doing something wrong. We had no idea. And someone said, oh, it was the stress from the move. You just moved to a new apartment. And it's like, that doesn't take the blood out of your child's limbs and put it in their core. It doesn't wake them up in the middle of the night at 2 a.m. screaming. It doesn't stop them from talking. It doesn't give them rashes. It doesn't. And so we're at a point where we had exhausted all of our options. we had no idea what we were supposed to do. And Trapper came home from school one night and he said, "Hey, there's a pediatric chiropractor at the school. What do you think? We should bring him there. Let's bring him there." And I'm like, "You bring him there. I have to go to work. I'm gonna get fired if I don't go to work. You bring him there and we'll see what they say." And honestly, I was pretty embarrassed. I had no idea what chiropractic was, what it did. I knew nothing. But it was someone who was a pediatric doctor. I'm like, okay, hey, 4th time's the charm. So I go to work, and Trapper left school early, came and picked Evan up from school, brought him to the school, and we met home. Trapper had gotten home a few minutes early before I did, so I walk into the apartment, and I'm just a mess, an absolute mess of like, what are we gonna do as a family? And I walk into the apartment, and I turn to the left, and it looks through the kitchen, and Evan is sitting on his high chair at the kitchen table. And he says, "Hi, Mommy, how you doing today?" And he hadn't talked in nearly 3 months. And I fell down on the ground, and I'm like, "What happened?" Trevor was like, "You wouldn't believe it." He had pressure on his spinal cord, on the first bone, on his neck, and there was another part a little way down in his cervical spine, and he had 2 in his low back, and he had 1 in the middle of his back, and his cranial bones had actually shifted, and he had a headache, and he couldn't tell us, and his body was shutting down because it couldn't function. And I'm like, what is this chiropractic thing? I mean, we literally went from knowing that we were losing our child and had no idea the power of chiropractic to having this boy that was back. He was back. He was back to our baby. The diarrhea stopped immediately. It took a few days for all the rashes to go away, but they went away and never came back. His energy was back. The violence was gone. He was back to speaking his normal way. Everything that who he was before was back. And ever since that day, I get checked, no less than 2 times a week. My children, even now that Evan is gone at school, they get checked every single week. And so many people walk in our door at Thrive, and it's like they wait for a crisis to happen before they search something out. You don't need to wait for a crisis to have to look for a miracle, because we are living in miracles. Our bodies are perfectly designed to thrive. Not to just survive, not to suffer, but to thrive. But when there's pressure on your nerves, as there was in Evan's, the body starts to shut down. It's not a chiropractic theory, it's just fact. And if the body is not working long enough with that nerve impulse to everything, shit starts shutting down. And that's seriously what it is. And then when it starts to shut down and people are like, "Oh, what must have just happened to me?" It didn't just happen. It's been there for a really long time. And so I believe everyone should get checked and adjusted when necessary. But my passion is that kids get checked and adjusted when necessary, because they can't speak up for themselves. People think like, "Oh, they're bouncing back, they're just fine. They're kids, they're fine." Just get them checked. It's that easy. It's not, if they're complaining, just get them checked. Because kids do not have to live the life that us adults do. I've been getting checked for 16 years, twice a week, and I will do that for the rest of my life. And my kids, I know, will never have to deal with the stuff that I had to deal with as an adult for pain and suffering because of what they're going through right now. They're getting checked. So my story to you is why I love what I do. And sometimes when I come off a bit strong about chiropractic, this is why. Because I believe we all can live such miraculous lives as the true people of who we are, instead of trudging through because that's what people do. But it's not what we have to do. go to a chiropractor, get checked, and adjusted when needed.
That was perfect.